Ladies and gentlemen, can I make a few comments this morning about gambling? It was reported in the media on the weekend that the government received technical advice that the proposal which Mr Wilkie had put forward wasn't feasible in that it could not be achieved by 2014. It was reported that that advice was received in April, and was further reported that there are FOI requests in relation to that advice. Now, I want to say two things about this. First, if it's true that the government received technical advice in April concerning the feasibility of Mr Wilkie's proposal, yet continued for month after month beyond that, holding out to both Mr Wilkie and to the Australian people that there was a possibility of this deal coming to fruition, then this is a further deception of both Mr Wilkie and the Australian people. And the second thing I want to say is this: the government should not be hiding behind FOI provisions for the release of this advice. They should come forward, release the advice so that both Mr Wilkie and the rest of the Australian public can see what it was that they were advised on technical grounds back in April, rather than hiding behind FOI provisions. They should come forward and release the advice immediately so that all of us can be aware of what was provided by way of government. And the final thing is that this seems to me to be a continued saga of deception on the part of the government, not only in relation to this matter but a whole range of matters now where their words simply can't be taken on face value. Any questions?
Can I ask what your position is in relation to the government's proposed trial on
We're going. The question is about the trial, the mandatory trial in the trial of mandatory pre-commitment in the ACT, to term it correctly. At the moment, we're going through our policy process. In fact, the policy task force, which I chair for the coalition, will be meeting with a whole range of interested parties later this week, ranging from the church's gambling task force to representatives of various industry groups. And as part of that, we'll be discussing with them a whole range of issues concerning gambling, not just poker machines, but obviously that will come up in the discussions, but also obviously the trial of mandatory pre-commitment. We're doing this in a proper way, a proper policy process, unlike the government, in order to arrive at solutions which we think will actually address problem gambling. But I do note, by way of passing, that in the announcement that the government made about their proposal, they've actually picked up many of the suggestions that we put out in our discussion paper. So, again, not only has the government not done the hard policy work, in this regard, they've simply pinched what we've put forward. Now, we're happy for them to adopt good proposals, but I do think that it shows once again that the government is not engaged in the proper policy process that they should be in relation to these matters generally. Well, there's a range of issues, and as I have explained, we're going to talk to people about it. We believe that there is a proper way of making policy that should involve listening to people, to considering what their views are about this. I haven't had the opportunity until now to sit down, as I will be able to do over a couple of days this week with my colleagues, and to have those discussions and question people about various aspects of it. We're going to be informed. We're not going to simply make policy on the run. We put a process in place at the end of last year, which has a reporting date by the end of February back to the Leader of the Opposition. We're working on that time frame, and I believe we'll be able to meet it.
In fact, this conferences appear to be relying on media reports about the possibility that the government received technical advice back in April. Shouldn't you be seeing whether that was the case before you actually start, I suppose, criticising the government for something that you're not even sure of?
Well, I'm prepared to accept what's written in the media when it quotes a spokesperson for the government, saying that FOI requests have been received in relation to this matter. I'm prepared to accept that that is a genuine report, but if it's not, I would have thought that given that this was reported on the weekend, then today we would have a comment from the government disputing the facts. There's been no disputation of the facts as they've been reported, so I think it's fair for any reasonable person, including the opposition, to accept the facts that have been reported as being true. Now, if they're true, then of course that raises the two questions. The first question is, was this a massive deception of Mr Wilkie for month after month after month, when they had technical advice that what he was proposing, and the time frame in particular of what he's proposing, was not feasible? And then secondly, why not release the technical advice? If it's technical advice about an issue which is of concern to many Australians, then it should be released so everybody can see what it says. No, I haven't spoken to Mr Wilkie about it. I'm simply relying, as I said, on the reports which have been in the media over the weekend.
Can I ask you in relation to the opposition's call for a police investigation into what has been planned and subsequently what's been discovered? The AFP has been saying that there is no investigation, there's no evidence of any criminality. Is there a need to continue to push this investigation?
There are many questions that remain unanswered. We have different versions now from various parties as to what happened. We have a version from the Prime Minister. We had a version 1 from Ms Sattler. We now have version 2 from Ms Sattler. So there are different versions from the various players as to what happened. So given that this is the most serious security breach involving a high-ranking official, in particular the Prime Minister, I think for probably 3 or 4 decades in Australia, I would have thought that the Australian Federal Police would want to have an investigation in any event to see whether or not this was handled properly or appropriately. And let's think about the image of this that was beamed not just right around Australia, but indeed right around the world, of a Prime Minister being bundled by federal police officers down some steps, losing a shoe, looking somewhat worried about the circumstances, and being bundled away from a very noisy demonstration. This is not a very good look for Australia, regardless of one's political views about this. So the combination of what's being portrayed about this nation and its Prime Minister, the fact that this is the most serious security breach that we've had for many, many years, those things alone would suggest that some sort of investigation ought to be undertaken by the Australian Federal Police. As to criminality, I understand the Shadow Attorney-General, Senator Brandis, is proposing to write to the Federal Police asking that this matter be looked into, and I would trust and expect that the Federal Police would respond to that in an appropriate professional manner.
On the basis of it, does look like that the Prime Minister, when she was the conduct of her office, or in particular the senior advisor, that action was swiftly taken. I think you're not satisfied.
Well, as I said, there are various versions of what happened as to who told whom what. We have one version that came out immediately, then another version which seems to contradict that first version. Not all of these versions can be correct. That's the reality. Facts of what happened are facts of what happened, and yet there is confusion about what happened because we're being given different versions. Now, we know that there was more than one staff member of the Prime Minister at the event. We know that various other conversations have been reported in the media and can be heard on, some can be heard on television footage from the time. So there's various versions of things, and there's a lot of questions that remain unanswered, and to try and just sweep this under the carpet when in the first place this arose in part from a verballing of a quite innocent statement made by the Leader of the Opposition, a statement which somebody as such eminence in the Indigenous community in Australia as Warren Mundine has said words to the effect that it was quite a reasonable statement. So somebody has gone out and verbaled Tony Abbott and done so in a way which has led to an incitement of people to carry on in behaviour which is totally unacceptable to ordinary Australians, whether or not they're Indigenous or non-Indigenous Australians. There are lots of questions to be answered, and our view is that this should not be just swept under the carpet and said, oh, well, that happened last week, and so we can move on to something this week. It demands answers.
So are you suggesting more than Mr Hodges and Ms Sattler were involved in fighting what happened?
I'm asking questions. Like most people who look at this are asking questions. And given that there are inconsistencies in the reports that are being given, then the reality is we have not got a settled truth about what happened. And the Australian people are entitled to have the truth of this matter. And we haven't had the truth, it would seem, so far.
There is some sort of talk of a confirmation when Parliament resumes. What's your position on that?
Well, I haven't discussed these matters with my colleagues. Our parliamentary tactics are matters that we discuss when we're in Parliament, and obviously we'll discuss a whole range of things. But frankly, this is a government which is lurching from one crisis to another. Everything they touch seems to turn to mush these days, and I think we're getting to the point where any moral authority of this Prime Minister has been largely eroded, and therefore the basis upon which this government continues to govern is really questioned by many people. When I walk around the streets, whether it's here in Melbourne or any other part of the country that I've been to over the last couple of weeks, couple of months or so, people are just saying they don't any longer trust this government. Now, if we've got to a situation in Australia where there is widespread distrust of the Prime Minister and the government, then that is a serious situation, and the opposition will respond to that in the appropriate way.
If we return back to the gambling policy, when is the coalition going to be putting out its final policy report?
Well, our timetable we're working on is for the task force to report to the Leader of the Opposition by the end of February. That's why we've had our discussion paper out, that's why we've called for submissions, of which we received many, and that's why we're conducting discussions with various groups this week. So after this week, as discussions have completed, we can then sit down, we can decide whether or not there are further people we need to talk to or not, and we can start to formulate our response. But the timetable we're working towards is to report to the Leader of the Opposition by the end of February. Of course, there's a policy process which we go through, and that involves the further broader policy committee, it involves the shadow cabinet, and I presume it will involve the party room, the coalition party room as well. So, as I said, from the outset, there is a proper policy process, and if you have a proper policy process in line and you follow it, then you're more likely to arrive at conclusions that generally take into account the broader views of the community, and you're less likely to make mistakes. Good. Thank you very much.